All right, welcome back. We thank you for staying with us. One of the biggest issues in the fight against COVID is the money. Everybody's asking, where is the money and how are we going to arrive at getting enough money to fight COVID-19 in the country? Well, right now, because we're well into our financial year, in fact, coming to the tail end, what needs to happen now is a supplementary budget that is taking place in Parliament. Now, a supplementary budget is usually done due to unforeseen expenditure like COVID-19 is, when the budget for the financial year has already been done. And it's usually done because you might want to reallocate funds from one vote to another by either increasing or decreasing expenditure from different areas. So this is basically how it is happening as we speak. It starts off at Treasury, but Treasury is where they get all of proposals for all of the monies that would be needed. But in this case, we know that they got proposals from the various other ministries, Interior, Foreign Affairs, and of course the most important one, Health. They took their proposals to Treasury. Treasury puts them together and presents that to the Budget and Appropriations Committee that is headed by Kimani Ichung'wah, whom we will speak to in just a moment. They then take a look at the proposals that have been made, make adjustments, recommendations. They even interview the CS for Treasury, which they did, to get to understand his justification for all of the proposals that have been made for reallocation of funds. Once they do that, then they table it in Parliament for the whole House, which is then the first reading, and that is exactly what took place yesterday. Now, the steps that are to follow is that you then go into the second reading where there is debate on the matters that are there, and then it goes into the committee stage where recommendations and adjustments are made to that report that's been tabled, and it's a committee of the whole House, and then they have the final vote on it, the third reading, which would then be taken to the President, if approved, for his assent to make it into law that would then authorize Treasury to spend the money on whatever proposals and priorities have been set aside. Now, that process can all happen in a day if they expedite it really quickly. But some people tell me, including the chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, Kimani Ichung'wah, that we were going to have a supplementary budget anyway, whether we had COVID-19 or not. It is important to understand where we were before COVID. You see, for this financial year, you've heard these figures being bandied about, but it's important to get them again. We were already at a deficit anyway. All right, so this is what our purse looked like before COVID-19. We had a deficit of 835.9 billion shillings for this current financial year. And in the month of March, which is when we reported our first case, this is what our deficit looked like. We were 132.3 billion shillings short. So, what are some of the reallocations that need to be done or have been made or proposed? You know about the tax amendments, and those were passed by the National Assembly yesterday. But like we said, what happens in this process is that you take a look at your expenditure, right? So you start to see where you'll reduce, where you'll increase, you'll move money from this to that, and usually a lot of money is moved from development expenditure. And in this case, the Big Four has been the biggest casualty of this. Here are some of the reallocations that we've seen. 17 billion shillings has been taken from pension. And you'll understand that that will put pensioners in an even more vulnerable position because some money has got to be found for them. Here are some other reallocations like we're talking about from the Big Four agenda. 1.85 billion shillings reallocated from the Universal Health Coverage Fund, and this has gone to recruiting additional health workers. And there's more here. Seed money, remember this, the National Housing Development Fund, this was for the affordable housing projects. That seed money also being reallocated to COVID-19 initiatives. And whilst all of that is being done and is being mulled, and these are some of the decisions that Parliament is going to be making as they debate the supplementary budget, they have come up with these recommendations. Remember at the beginning we said that the Budget and Appropriations Committee sits down and then gives its recommendations. So these are some of the recommendations that they've said that, listen, despite the fact that we're trying to reduce our expenditure, this is one very important thing to do, to be able to prioritize our payment of pending bills. Those are verified, to, of course, enable small businesses to stay afloat, particularly those that were supplying goods and services to the government. And then here's another one. The committee is recommending that all resources that have been allocated towards COVID-19 be appropriated under the National Assembly. Now, what this means is that they want all of this to fall under National Assembly that can then manage the accountability and governance of the funds. Here is another recommendation from the committee. Remember, many have been asking Parliament to do something, to give some of the money. Well, they have taken 3 billion shillings from the allocation that was given to Parliament, and they have specifically ring-fenced it and said it should go to protecting frontline health workers, provision of PPEs, and they've actually dictated the centers where they want it to go: KNH, KU, MTRH in Kitui, and the Jaramogi Oginga Referral and Teaching Hospital in Kisumu as well, to look after the Western region. So these are some of the recommendations that have been made. All right, like we said, yet to be passed. And that is a process that is happening next week. But remember, the man at the helm of this, as he leads Parliament, is the chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, MP Kimani Ichung'wah, who joins me live now. Mheshimiwa, it's good to see you, and thank you for joining us. Let's talk about some of the reductions, increments, and reallocations.
Good to hear from you, now that I can't see you.
Thanks, it's good to hear from you as well. So let's get into it, right? The reductions, increments, reallocations. Could you give us some of the examples of those? Because this is one of your key recommendations.
I think you've highlighted quite a number of them, and the key casualties basically is the Big Four agenda, the proposed budgets for the Big Four agenda in UHC, and the connectivity for the Naivasha Industrial Park, the special economic zones in Dongokundu and Naivasha. Those are some of the major casualties. Of course, many other development expenditure in a number of areas across all ministries in government will be affected by the cuts. And of course, inevitably, the recurrent expenditure across all government departments and all arms of government, from the judiciary, Parliament, to all ministries and the departments and agencies of government. There are very huge cuts, especially on things to do with travel, hospitality, and basically all discretionary expenditure that we can really do without for the next quarter of this year.
Okay, you had raised some reservations, and I went through your report that was presented on the floor of the House, and you said the committee is concerned that the response to COVID-19 budget is somewhat muted. What did you mean by that?
Yeah. I think when we engaged with the National Treasury and we were able to listen at least to the chair of the Health Committee in Parliament, who had had opportunity to engage with the Ministry of Health, we realized that other than the 1 billion shillings that you have mentioned that is going towards the recruitment of health workers, and another 3.6 billion shillings that is going under development expenditure, and I presume maybe to buy PPEs or maybe buy all the other equipment that is needed for treatment, hospital beds and everything that will be needed in hospitals. There wasn't really anything more that was going directly to the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health, in their requisition for the 2020-21 budget, have very huge figures that they're asking for we had hoped that maybe some of them may be catered for under this budget. As you mentioned, there is a huge shortage of health workers across the country. A hospital like MTRH in Eldoret has a shortfall of about 900 million shillings on their current expenditure in terms of salaries and wages to their health workers. And you can bet this is not the time to expect health workers to be on strike or anything close to that, because they don't have salaries or they can't access their wages at any particular time. So we would have expected that maybe some of these interventions would come to be. However, as you have rightly said, we were also careful to make sure that we don't, as Parliament, fall into the same trap. And that is why we ring-fenced the 3 billion shillings that we have ring-fenced, which was basically cuts from the parliamentary budget. And we said these 3 billion shillings, we don't just want to throw it into another kitty where it will be disbursed in a way that we can't tell. And we said, since the cuts are specifically for COVID-related expenditure, we want to ring-fence this to specific expenditure, especially around the pandemic areas, Nairobi, Mombasa, Kilifi, Kwale, parts of Western Kenya, and of course Mandera. You see there's also Mandera Hospital. There's a hospital in Kitui that we have said, let's put money to buy PPEs to secure our frontline health workers. Let's buy things even in Nairobi for healthcare workers, and basically things that would help the people to protect them against COVID.
Okay.
If the ministry will be able to buy even masks for people and be able to give them at least in those areas where COVID, like you have rightly reported, the escalating cases in Mombasa. So be it. But we want a fund that we also can be able to oversight in Parliament. That's why we said we want to ring fence this. We want the health ministry to be able to report back to the health committee in Parliament.
Okay, and you've raised issues of accountability and making sure that all of the funds are in there. I mean, I saw even in your report, you were talking about, say, the tax, the salary cuts that we have seen from the presidency and various other members of the executive. Does it concern you? And what would your recommendations be in addition to this? That there's monies that seem to be in different pockets or different purses, if you like. Do you think that poses a challenge with respect to governance and accountability of the funds as to ensure that they all go to what they're meant for? And, just your final recommendations, because we also heard from the floor of Parliament some, reservations that were raised about VAT and whether that is really the way to go and whether that will be helpful and a shot in the arm for the country.
Let me start with the governance issue first. Of course, the corruption sharks are waiting. And they're waiting with their mouths wide open. And that's why you'll see in our report, we did recommend that specifically all GOK resources that will be committed to COVID in any fund, be it the fund that is being managed by Jane Karuku or any other fund that may be set up, must and should be accountable to Parliament, and Parliament must be able to oversight those funds. You realize last month, there was an announcement of some 5 billion shillings that was coming from the World Bank. It's actually 6 billion shillings coming from the World Bank. There was some 7.24 billion shillings that came from the Central Bank of Kenya, some 2 billion shillings that came from the agencies fighting corruption that was said to have been recovered from the corrupt in this country. And that kitty, if you look at the budget that came to Parliament yesterday, that money was not reflected anywhere. And that's why we said, because we were told that this money is being accumulated in a fund to prepare for any eventualities that may come out of COVID. That's why we said whatever fund these amounts will be put into, we must hold those who are running those funds to account to Parliament on behalf of the people of Kenya.
Okay.
On the question of VAT, Yvonne, I'm among those who had reservations that, and this is in relation not to the budget, but to the tax amendments that we did in Parliament and what was done by the Cabinet Secretary on VAT. I had my own reservations and I said, cautiously, I will support, but with caution, that a reduction of 16 to 14% of VAT may not necessarily trickle down to Kenyans. I think so far it's only Safaricom that I had announced a few cents cut in their bills. But for the rest of us, we have not seen any meaningful change in terms of consumer prices of items. And therefore, I was of the view that probably we will lose in that 2% cut of VAT, we will lose up close to 50 billion shillings in one quarter. Specifically 49.7 billion shillings. And I was asking myself, even as I contributed in Parliament, wouldn't we be better collecting the 50 billion shillings in this one quarter? That is the 50 billion shillings we need maybe to give stipends to the people of Kenya. The 2,000 shillings we are giving, you can imagine how many people would be able to give stipends of even up to 5,000. If you were to give 5,000 shillings for a month, you'd be able to give stipends to 10 million Kenyans.
Right. So
you only need, as Governor Joho is saying, if you were to lock down Mombasa today, assuming the population in Mombasa that needs support is 500,000, you would be able to give them even 10,000 shillings and be able to lock down for real.
Okay. So what's the ultimate solution? Debt? I mean, what do we do? Because already from what we've seen, we were not doing too well pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID, as you rightly said, and I had indicated this, whether COVID came or COVID did not come, we were going to have a supplementary budget. Because the reality of our economy is that in terms of revenues, we are not doing very well. A shortfall of 130 billion in ordinary revenue is not something small. The tax measures that we have instituted, will occasion another tax deficit or a shortfall in the last quarter of this year of about 127 billion. Therefore, you're talking of a shortfall of 260 billion shillings. And therefore, one of the immediate things, of course, is to cut on expenditure, and that's what we have done. Although those expenditure cuts may not really be enough, we must, in a way, be able to cushion our economy such that businesses do not suffer a lot, so that they're able to continue paying taxes inevitably, because the only source of revenue for government is taxes. The other thing I would expect is that President Kenyatta will pick up his phone, call the Chinese president, call the French president, call the Italian prime minister. These are some of our top creditors. Be able to renegotiate on part of our debt. I'll tell you, if we're able to renegotiate on our debt payments for this last quarter, we can save close to 40 or 35 billion shillings. In the next 1 year, the new financial year, beginning July to June next year, if you're able to renegotiate debt, you can save up to probably about another 160 billion shillings. And that would cover the shortfalls that you have in revenue. Okay. For me, borrowing may not be the solution at this time. Okay. Maybe debt renegotiation. And I have seen the Ethiopian Prime Minister being very keen on that, and I hope that our government and the executive is working towards debt renegotiation. Right. Okay. I participated in a virtual meeting with of the World Bank spring meetings, and G20 countries are already willing and ready to support IDA countries with debt renegotiation. And I think that, for me, would be the immediate way forward. It may take a little bit of time, but maybe the time to start the engagement is now. Is now. Okay, indeed. Thank you very much. MP Kimani Ichung'wah, who's the chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, we thank you for your time, Mheshimiwa. Stay safe. Practice social distancing. Wash your hands. Asante sana for making the time for us here. I am trying to do that with your team here. Absolutely. We will definitely do that as well. Thank you very much for your time today. And like he says, debt renegotiation, that is apparently already underway. We understand the AU is speaking with the G20 countries, and our president has already initiated those talks. So that is Kimani Ichung'wah. The supplementary budget will hopefully be passed next week, and the monies that are desperately needed for this fight will be released immediately. So that's how we're going to fund it. Is it